Maybe you remember on the 4th of July earlier this year, President Joe Biden said this.
While the virus hasn't been vanquished, we know this. It no longer controls our lives. It no longer paralyzes our nation. And it's within our power to make sure it never does again.
Really? Really? I mean, no disrespect to Biden on this. It did feel at the time like we had things under control as the vaccination was getting rolled out everywhere. But the combination of the Delta variant and the anti-vax movement has shown pretty clearly that we don't have this thing fully nailed down. Plus, some new variant might pop up, and even if we bring corona completely under control, are we really more prepared today to make sure another completely different virus doesn't paralyze the world than we were like 2 years ago? I mean, after the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, we already knew about quarantine, social distancing, washing hands, and face masks. For the roughly 18 months until the vaccine started rolling out, these were the same tools we had today to fight COVID. In some cases, masks were even pushed harder back then. They were mandatory in San Francisco in the fall of 1918, and those who didn't comply faced fines, imprisonment, and having the threat of having their names printed in the newspaper as mask slackers. We've gotten better at treating COVID patients in the ICU, and of course we have the PCR test. But it's quite expensive, it takes considerable time to get the results, which means we have to wait around in isolation, which sucks. It's seriously uncomfortable having that swab shoved up your nose each time. And during much of the pandemic, the tests have been in short supply. Plus, it doesn't really tell us if someone has the virus until the patient is symptomatic, so they could be innocently walking around infecting people. Now, imagine if we had an accurate test to detect coronavirus several days before symptoms developed. And it was super cheap and non-invasive, and it provided results in just a few seconds so people could get instantly tested everywhere, just as quickly and easily as like when they take your temperature by pointing that little thermometer device at your forehead. That would have been a game changer, right? I mean, there would have been testing in front of every senior living facility. Like, this test could have been used to quickly and cheaply check kids and teachers every single day to keep schools open. It could be used at the entry of hospitals so healthy doctors didn't need to unnecessarily quarantine, and those infected could be isolated before even entering the hospital. It would have likely saved hundreds of thousands or even millions of lives and kept the economy running and society open and done wonders for our mental health and quality of life. Yeah, well, guess what? We already did have such a test. It was already successfully tested in April 2020, over a year and a half ago, and it's been proven to work around the world, but it never got a mainstream rollout. Talk about a world-class screw-up. Let's take a deeper look into the solution. Okay, because I'm making this video primarily for the travel industry, imagine how this could have saved travel, and still can. It could be used at the entry of airports so passengers and airport staff could all get tested before entering the airport, and perhaps have a second screening on the way to the gate, then another quick screening when passengers arrive at their destination airport, and perhaps again at the hotel, so that hotel staff and those guests arriving by car could get tested as well. That's 4 cheap, fast, and accurate tests on an international or even domestic air trip. Okay, enough with the buildup. The proven solution I'm talking about is, wait for it, sniffing dogs. Okay, you probably already heard this, but you may not have considered what sort of an international muck-up it was. We've seen dogs at the airport before. They've been successfully trained to smell for drugs and explosives, but in healthcare, they've also been successfully trained to detect cancer just by smelling the patient's breath. They can detect malaria. Amazingly, they can detect Parkinson's disease years before people even get symptoms, allowing for preemptive treatment. Dogs are also helping diabetics know when their blood sugar level is dropping or spiking. In other words, dogs are pretty amazing at this sort of thing. So it's not really a surprise that they can also be trained to detect corona as well. It's just the sort of story the media loves.
They say a dog's nose knows. And at a makeshift lab in Finland's Helsinki airport, researchers from the University of Helsinki are collecting sweaty samples from thousands of arriving passengers to show a dog's nose knows COVID-19, even better than man's best test.
They're, cheaper?
Yep.
They're quicker?
Yep.
Possibly as accurate?
Possibly even more accurate.
Because they can smell COVID days before a patient develops symptoms.
That, really soft thing you have on your carpet at home, or, that starts barking and wants to have food and go out, that this is actually a super accurate machine.
Here in Helsinki, they're screening passengers like me after baggage claim. A quick wipe down, hand over your tissues, and the dog goes to work behind a screen, scratching a positive control sample.
Well, that was quick.
COVID detecting dogs. They're a thing in America now, and they're making their debut in the NBA tonight. The Miami Heat allowing some fans in the stand. That's new for their game against the Clippers. Virus-sniffing dogs are set to walk past the fans as they arrive, just like you see here in this video that the league released. If the dog sits down, that means it's detected the virus, and the person and their party will not be allowed inside American Airlines Arena.
Hospital of Sarasota may be the very first hospital in the nation to have a COVID-19 detection dog.
COVID-19 screenings have become regular practice at Doctors Hospital of Sarasota.
Any cough, fever, shortness of breath.
But there's an extra tool to help detect COVID-19.
Okay, let's go over this timeline again. Professor Anna Björkman.
Hello, I'm Anna Björkman.
Told me that they were ready to go after a successful test in April 2020. But they didn't get into the Helsinki airport until about 6 months later and on a very limited trial basis. Meanwhile, United Arab Emirates was already using dogs by August 2020, and you've got dogs getting trained in July of 2020 in Chile. The Miami Heat is using dogs in 2021 in January, right at the beginning of the year, and Germany is showing a 94% accuracy in February of 21, and Mexico is using them by March 2021. Then in September, we get this Rachel Maddow piece.
Detect the virus. Watch how she sits after she smells the inside of a mask that has deactivated virus in it. Then watch how she just keeps walking when she smells the mask of someone who's not infected.
The dogs are 97% accurate. I mean, it's the same as a PCR test, so I mean, it's a great thing.
Miami International Airport is the first in the nation to have the dogs.
Little late to the game, don't you think? The story should have been called, "Why in the hell is it taking so long for cities, countries, and airports to get dog sniffing programs off the ground?" If it's as effective as they all say, it should have been a rollout like we saw with vaccines, with WHO and the CDC pushing for it, and governments making big initiatives. When I spoke to Professor Björkman in Finland, according to her, it just takes a few days to train dogs to detect corona if they're already professional sniffers. But just about any dog can be trained to do it in 2 to 3 months.
When I calculated once that to keep up the borders of Finland, we calculated that we would need about 700 dogs. So that would keep all border points up 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So, and we have about 1 million dogs in Finland, and all dogs can really do this. We've even had really kind of snuffy-nosed, or totally non-nosed dogs doing this.
And we don't know how accurate each dog will be, nor how much patience they'll have to sniff for long stretches until they've been trained. But as with the military, we don't know who the elite soldiers will be until they've all gone through basic training. Nearly all the dogs who get trained will be useful at some level. Now, just in the US, 700,000 have died from COVID, which makes it so painful to see why so many are getting on board so late in the game with this. We could have had the canine equivalent of the national draft. Every country could. We could have paid dog owners who are willing and have time to help go through basic training with their dog, and then continue to pay those who perform well, a bit like we do with the military. Getting back to the travel industry for a moment, even if the national health officials were slow to mobilize on this, as the Miami Heat demonstrated, everyone could have started their own initiative. Airports, airlines, hotel associations, or better yet, they could have come together to solve this. Dogs could have been the heroes that kept travel, and really the entire society, open and safe, or at least significantly safer. We know how to do the training. We had proof of concept with successful testing results in several countries. What the hell happened? When I spoke to Professor Björkman, she believes that when people hear it's a dog, they think about keeping them someplace and dog poop and feeding them, and it seems like a hassle, and dogs need to have a human handler with them. If it was a little beeping electronic device that did essentially the same thing, she believes it would have been an overnight success. Even though a device requires nearly the same amount of workforce, I mean, you still need a person to hold the device and to test people and to make sure the device is accurate and fix any ones that break and change the batteries. But maybe the bigger issue is that unlike the pharmaceutical industry, there's no well-connected giant company with an army of lobbyists making money off of dogs that could have pushed the idea through. In fact, there's more likely more money to be made by not using dogs.
That in Finland, for example, a screening test of a PCR, that costs at sometimes about 250 euros. And whereas kind of the costs of having a dog and a dog handler and making one test was about 5 euros.
I'm not trying to jumpstart a conspiracy, just stating the obvious, that companies have gotten wealthy from these tests. Together, these 5 COVID testing companies have earned more than $5 billion in revenue on corona tests. Just this one company, Quest, took in $2.7 billion. So here's the good news. It's not too late to start investing in a network of dog sniffers. Even though we have a vaccine for COVID, not everyone's taking it, new strains may develop, and we don't know exactly when the vaccine or boosters will wear off. Plus, even those who are getting vaccinated can still get and spread corona. And in terms of getting travel jump-started again, having everyone get tested for free quickly and easily is a great way to restore confidence with those who are understandably a bit nervous to start traveling again. Imagine how reassuring this would all be for travelers who've been scared of COVID for the last 18 months. People who are still required to enter airplanes with masks on despite having 2 vaccinations. Wouldn't it feel better as an added precaution to know all your fellow passengers as well as everyone at the airport had been tested that day? Let me put it another way. If it didn't cost any more or take any longer, wouldn't you rather enter a plane that used dogs to quickly test everyone and remove passengers who tested positive for COVID, or enter a plane that wasn't using any testing? The strange thing is, when nations lose a battle or a war, they don't say, well, that's over, no point in having a military now. No, they start strengthening their military almost immediately. We could have centers of trained dogs around the country and around the world to deploy as needed if a new strain or new virus comes our way. Even if we do manage to create some sort of super device in the future, it's not likely to get built and then deployed overnight. Are we supposed to wait in lockdown for 6 to 18 months until such a device is invented and distributed? Or wait another 18 months for a vaccine? Remember, it just takes a few days to retrain professional sniffing dogs. Only with something like this in place can we take the president's words seriously when he says,
and it's within our power to make sure it never does again.
You know, there should be a fast lane for this in a future epidemics because it could have changed the world.
Okay, I know this piece was slightly less travel and tourism focused and more about keeping the entire economy open, but I will be making more tourism focused pieces in the coming days and weeks.